and they shoot and kill the person. And that's what they were telling me. It scared the people on the plane to death. And they ought to be afraid. You know, when people come in with guns drawn, things can happen. And just because these people are police officers doesn't mean that they won't shoot you accidentally or out of fear. We see this happening all the time. Now, as we move from that kind of surveillance that we're seeing at the fusion centers, understand it's not just going to be the public cameras. It's not just going to be the cameras in your home. One of their key points at which they're going to collect data on you is going to be your car. We see this article today in Wired Magazine. Calling an Uber is cooler than owning a car. And all these automakers want in. Well, so does the government. The government wants to come in and take a look at what you're doing in your car. Automotive News just talked about how the feds were flashing their badges to get auto data. They say back in February 12th, and this is before the big dispute between Apple and the FBI on the iPhone of these shooters in California. Before that happened, they said a collection of the audio industry's leading cybersecurity experts gathered at a sprawling FBI complex in Quantico, Virginia. They met with an elite digital SWAT team called the Operational Technology Division. Leaders of this FBI division explained that they were interested in capturing connected car data for investigations. And they outlined the requisite legal process, okay? Now, after all of this happened, they said, well, this is very cordial. It seemed to be very routine. There was a lot of people there. But then it got crystallized when they saw what happened in the dispute between Apple over the iPhone and with the FBI. And so you got some of these people who were there and speaking off the record and said, you know what, we're trying to make these systems more secure because we don't want hackers to break in and do malevolent things. But he goes, I don't feel very comfortable with where we're at. He says there's a lot of pressure on the auto industry to do a better job with security, but at the same time, we're being told by the government, you guys are getting better at security, and that's messing us up. And you got to understand, at the end of this year, the Department of Transportation, Federal Department of Transportation is going to be mandating talking cars. They're going to talk to each other, but they're also going to talk to their infrastructure. This is the way they know where you sleep, where you work, everything you do. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight. In this segment, we're going to be talking to Dr. Francis Boyle. He is a leading American expert in international law, also an expert in bioweapons and bioterror. At the bottom of the hour, we're going to be talking to our reporters who are now in Anaheim. They were in Albuquerque, New Mexico last night. They had a lot of video. You can see that video at Infowars.com. It's linked on the Drudge Report. The title is Communist Anti-Trump Rioters Attack Police, Destroy Property in Albuquerque. There's a lot of different videos that they put up. And we're going to be talking to Jakari Jackson, who was hit with a rock by these violent protesters last night. And they're now in Anaheim, California. They're going to be covering the rally tonight. We're going to see what happens with that. They'll be joining us at the bottom of the hour. But right now we're going to go to Dr. Boyle. He is an expert in international law as well as bioterror. He drafted the Biological Weapons Anti-Terrorism Act of 1989. He was the American implementing legislation for the 1972 Biological Weapons Convention. He served on the board of directors of Amnesty International from 88 to 92 and on and on. He's very impressive, very long resume. We talked to him back January 29th about the Zika virus. I wanted to get an update from Dr. Boyle. What has he learned about the Zika virus in the interim? I mean, is this something that is being used simply to scare people? Or is this a test? Or is it, what are they doing with this? And of course, when he was back in January 29th, when he talked to Alex Jones, he was talking a lot about the genetically modified mosquitoes that are being used as a disease transmission vector. And one of the articles that Dr. Boyle sent us today was Department of Defense is adding funding to enhance Zika surveillance by military labs. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Boyle. Do you think this is a pandemic test run, or is this something they really want to unleash against us? What should we be concerned about with this?
Well, thank you very much for having me on, David, and my best to your viewing audience. Yeah, just to back up, when I first read of Zika in Brazil, I just had a working hypothesis that, well, maybe this was due to African Zika mosquitoes somehow migrating to Brazil because of global warming or something like that. I didn't really know. Mm-hmm. But I then proceeded to investigate it, and I've continued to investigate it. We are not dealing with African Zika. As a matter of fact, the people over in Zika in Uganda, the town of Zika, I guess the town where it was found, they're living quite well without any of these symptoms at all.
No tiny heads, no shrunken heads.
No. And they've been over there for all these years, living with Zika. So that hypothesis went out. And as I proceeded to investigate, my conclusion was that this was a genetically engineered biowarfare agent that was inserted into these mosquitoes. And since that time, I have read here, and I believe I sent to Nico on your staff, my analysis of biological testing involving human subjects by the Department of Defense, 1977.
Yes.
Congressional hearings published here. And it is very clear here that the CDC lab at Fort Collins, Colorado, has a long history of doing offensive biological warfare work to make biological agents with insects, including mosquitoes. And in addition, we can also tie this into the University of Wisconsin in Madison, sort of northwest of me here, where they have a long history of doing offensive biological warfare work. And I believe I've discussed that with Alex before.
Yeah.
And then also the University of Texas down there at Galveston, again, a long history of doing offensive biological warfare work. So as far as I can figure out, and again, please understand, I do not have any type of security clearance or access to classified information on purpose. I've never wanted to work for the United States government, but wanted to maintain my my independence. But as far as I can figure out, we're dealing here with a genetically engineered biowarfare agent. This GE Zika has a gene in there that disrupts the brain cells of babies. It's a brain disruptor. And
well, as you pointed out when you were here back in the end of January, you told Alex that the budget that the American that the Pentagon has for biological warfare is 3 times what they had for the Manhattan Project. And of course, one of the things that's very concerning about this is they bring these things in. The CDC calls them select agents. And people need to understand some of this terminology. They talk about giving them gain of function. That means that the disease itself is going to have a gain of function. It's going to be more virulent than the original disease. They're going to modify it for that. Then they're also going to gain of function also includes making it more easily transmissible. But in the case of Zika, it's interesting because there's been a lot of talk about genetically engineering these mosquitoes. So you've got not only the disease itself that's been engineered for gain of function, but you've also got these genetically modified organisms, these mosquitoes, which are the disease vector. They are the means of transmission for this initially. Of course, it can be transmitted now sexually, but you know that is a part of it as well. So they've got 2 different aspects here. It's very, very troubling to see our government so heavily involved in something that is so incredibly dangerous and destructive, I think.
Select agents is just a euphemism for research and development of offensive biological weapons using these agents that they've investigated from the very beginning of the U.S. biowarfare program. Yes. We've spent now, according to my calculations, well over $100 billion since 9/11/2001 to construct an offensive biowarfare industry here in the United States, along the lines of what we used to have before the Biological Weapons Convention, when it was perfectly lawful.
And to give people an idea of this, too, there was recently a series last year. USA Today ran this, the Tulane National Primate Center. And, of course, Tulane has been involved in things like the Tuskegee experiment, things like what was happening with Ebola in Africa last year, or a couple of years ago. But they brought in a disease or a bacteria, an organism that was found in only 2 countries, Burkholderia pseudomallei, and they had it in their primate lab. They had it in a level 3 biosafety lab. And then all of a sudden they found it in the primates who are outside of the lab, just in the pens. And this is something that gets into the soil and becomes endemic in the soil. And the series of events that USA Today did on this was just absolutely not only frightening, but it was comical. If you look at the science behind it, they come out and they send people out there. One of the investigators comes down with this bacteria, and they said, "Oh, I'm sure it was in the area before." No, it wasn't. They even had people from the CDC center say, "No, that only existed in 2 places in the world." But they're bringing this type of stuff into our country. They're increasing its functionality. They're making it more dangerous. They're making it more easily transmissible. And then somehow they let it escape from their lab. People should be very, very concerned about what our government is doing without our permission, without our knowledge.
Well, again, you're correct, David, about Tulane. Again, a very long history there of the Tulaners doing offensive biological warfare work, including the Black West African Ebola pandemic. I might have been on Alex to discuss their involvement in that. They were up to their eyeballs in that one as well.
Yes.
But you are correct, and that is why I think and gain of function is simply, again, another euphemism for taking these biological warfare agents, the select agents, and making them even more deadly. And we're doing that. We now have over 13,000 so-called life scientists doing this type of dirty biowarfare work that I think Dr. Mengele would be proud of. And as pointed out by USA Today in their exposés, well over 300 labs here in the United States working on offensive biowarfare activity of this nature to better weaponize biological agents. Indeed, the Pentagon has sent their researchers out all over the world to find unique, specialized biological agents that they can bring back and weaponize. And that's what happened here with Zika. Zika was found in Africa, in Uganda, in about 1947, and was deposited with the American Type Culture Collection. You can read that at ATCC. Well, it was then weaponized. They worked on weaponizing it, and that's what we're seeing now. As for ATCC, we know for a fact that in the Reagan administration, they ordered ATCC and the Center for Disease Control to ship 40 different shipments of weapons-specific biological agents to Saddam Hussein in Iraq in the hope and expectation that he would weaponize these agents.
We got to take a break, Dr. Boyle. We're going to be right back with Dr. Francis Boyle. We're talking about war crimes here, folks. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, and we're talking to Dr. Francis Boyle, a leading expert on bioterrorism, someone who has been involved for decades in trying to enact treaties to stop the kinds of experimentation that we see our government doing. Before we go back to Dr. Boyle, I just want to mention real quickly that we have extended the sale for nascent iodine, the Survival Shield X2 at InfoWarsLife.com. This is something that I have as part of my preparedness package for my family. This is a great time for you to stock up while we've got it on special. Again, I don't know how much longer that sale is going to last. 20% off nascent iodine, Survival Shield X2 at InfoWarsLife.com. Also, if you sign up for our free newsletter at InfoWars.com/newsletter, you can get a promo code for 50% off the Hillary for Prison t-shirt or the Come and Take It t-shirt, our 2 most popular t-shirts. It's our InfoWars Underground Insider newsletter will give you unique content that you won't find even at our website, as well as promo codes for other specials along the line. Now, Dr. Boyle, One of the first things I did when I came here, there was a group I was working with